This is the third video in a three-part series on organizational learning. This video will address a cutting-edge topic that explains the mindset of many top innovative CEOs. Deutero learning is an extension of our organizational learning lectures. It means simply learning to learn. Again, you will be asked questions based on your ability to draw the organizational learning diagram we have covered in both prior tests. You'll need to understand the direction of both loops. Single loop learning occurs in a counterclockwise sequence. Double loop learning occurs in a clockwise direction. It's like a figure eight, but the direction of the arrows may be important. Also know the elements, and again, general systems theory is depicted at the bottom of the diagram. At this point, I hope you have a good idea as to what organizational learning is. So what is Deutero organizational learning? As stated, it is simply learning to learn. But it is not easy to do and is considered by some organizational theorists as the most intelligent behavior possible by managers of corporations and individuals alike. Deutero learning occurs when organizations successfully adopt or improve their organizational learning processing. Understanding Deutero learning is critical for top executives because it is the only way to master organizational learning. Because organizational learning leads to change competency, in today's turbulent competitive environment, using Deutero learning to reach learning mastery is invaluable. To start a Deutero learning project, companies will need to incur startup costs by deliberately and conscientiously accepting and disseminating the ideas of organizational learning to its employees. So Deutero learning should be treated as any innovation would. It will require an adoption phase with planning and appropriated resources. After this phase is complete, organizational learning will be an integral part of the organizational fabric. It will be embedded in structure, i.e. systems and policies, and culture, i.e. people and relationships. Let's look at a formal, professionally initiated example of a Deutero learning in practice. This is a project in which I took part in the Technology Transfer Department at NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama. The department had problems with bureaucracy and wanted me to work in their offices to observe what the sources of bureaucracy may be. They showed me their existing processes. They had 5. For example, one was the Space Act agreement process, which involved leveraging NASA's one-of-a-kind assets to recoup investments by leasing them to the private sector. For example, Boeing Corporation may sometimes be interested in leasing one of NASA's massive wind tunnels to study the aerodynamics of a new commercial aircraft design. The processes were antiquated, relying on email only and not very well communicated to the public. The processes also didn't change very often due to political concern. Process owners were territorial and either did not want the extra work or did not want to be known as having a problem process. Typical bureaucracy. After discussions, departmental leaders decided to add a 6th process to their process portfolio. The new process would guide the department toward changing any of their existing 5 processes. Take a guess as to what the process looked like. It was very similar to the organizational learning model that we have studied this semester. Departmental leadership wanted the new process to guide learning behavior in its members toward ongoing process improvement. This was a momentous study because a world-class organization had conscientiously decided to adopt organizational learning formally. Further, members were guided to improve the learning process itself. They were to follow the process, build applications to improve it, and like the original 5 processes, make learning become more efficient. Departmental members, in fact, did this, and so the organization experienced Deutero learning. This example shows that initial organizational learning adoption and subsequent improvements in the process embodies Deutero learning. That is, Deutero learning was found to be a real practical phenomenon. An informal example of Deutero learning shows that you can actually participate in this highly intelligent organizational behavior. Let's say you graduate and get hired. Your boss is really competitive, so she asks you to search the internet for information about competitors. Your boss is blown away by what you have found, information about suppliers your company can use and their strategic plan dated just 2 years ago. Referring back to the OL model, you're directly engaging in knowledge acquisition, and your boss makes this a permanent part of your job. He wants you to do this every Monday morning. Over time, you get better at this. You become more efficient, finding better and better sources of information, and you learn new operators like and or for doing Google searches, and you learn about new search engines and meta search engines. Because you expanded your capacity for knowledge acquisition on behalf of the organization, you have exhibited Deutero learning behavior. You can see from this example that Deutero learning is also greatly aided by information technology. Engaging in Deutero learning informally would be up to the individual, but why would a company bother investing time, energy, and money into formal Deutero learning as NASA's Technology Transfer Department did? Doing so requires a substantial mind shift away from ordinary hierarchical ways of thinking. Here are the consequences of formally committing an organization to Deutero learning. First, all organizational learning processes are accepted in organizational life. To accomplish this best, organizational learning needs to be formally adopted as a process. Second, antiquated, bureaucratic, and rigid hierarchical thinking should be contentiously rejected within the organization. It should be viewed as an inferior way of thinking to truly unleash the innovative power of organizational learning. Third, both incremental and radical types of change become a natural part of organizational life. Adaptation to the environment is embraced rather than dreaded, as it has traditionally been. Fourth, visible numbers such as profit and other outcomes are an afterthought. Since the causes of positive outcomes are studied extensively, our people are more focused on fishbone diagrams, as described in the previous video in this series, than accounting ratios. Fifth, time spent on organizational learning is viewed as an investment rather than an expense. Deutero learning organizations cannot shun intellectual pursuits aimed toward improvement as being costly. It is only through these intellectual pursuits that our organization can get on top of the competition and stay there, as UCLA coach John Wooden did. Sixth, changes in technology become organizational opportunities rather than burdens. Our leadership monitors the competitive landscape for new technologies and looks for ways to improve our organization. This is a critical difference from traditional hierarchies which view new technologies as costly burdens to track and understand. I have explained that Deutero learning is an empowering discipline for organizations. However, it can also have major implications for individuals. Here are three major implications Deutero learning can have for you as an asset to your employer. First, we are talking about becoming an excellent learner. Professionals I have invited to present to classes have consistently cited learning as an important reason for their success. We often hear the catchphrase, knowledge is power. However, this should be more thoughtfully stated. Isn't it true that not all knowledge is powerful? Personal knowledge about sports or current events may yield the ability to talk to others about common interests. However, this type of knowledge is usually not very applicable to solving work-related professional problems. The show Jeopardy is fun to watch and contestants are impressive, but the knowledge is characterized by show producers as trivial, useful really only on that show. Think about who controls the knowledge and power in society. Do you think librarians are the most powerful people in your community? Of course not. It is politicians. And politicians have little relevant knowledge other than knowing how to get elected. Not all knowledge is applicable toward advancing your career, which requires being able to solve real complex organizational problems. I think it is more appropriate for serious professionals to be guided by the phrase, knowledge of learning is supreme. Master learners can do anything. Be an astronaut, doctor, ship captain, or succeed in roles at whatever opportunities come your way. Second, network centrality means we have so much useful knowledge that we become the center of importance in our organization. The field of IT is filled with categories of knowledge that can be empowering. For example, if you can use, build, or train others in cybersecurity, software development, database management, programming, telecommunications management, and instructing others how to use case tools, people will come to you for your wisdom when relevant problems arise. In other words, you will have network centrality. You'll know so much about solving specific problems, your colleagues will come to you. I have a simple example of network centrality. A friend of mine had a jar of candy on his desk when we were doctoral students. He always knew what was going on in the program and had insight on how to stay ahead of his studies. I asked him how it was that he was the only one who always knew what was going on in the program, and he laughed and pointed at the jar of candy on his desk. He said, "Do you see that jar of candy? I keep it full every time a professor walks by. They think about stopping by to get some candy. I know what professor likes what type of candy and make sure I always have everyone's available. I use that to attract them. They don't want to be rude, so they stop and talk." This is how knowledge works in organizations. Extremely useful knowledge is like the jar of candy. You can use it to attract others and gain network centrality. A third implication of Deutero learning is the next stage of maturity for great learners, free agency. You may be aware of this phrase from sports. In fact, professionals in the corporate world can learn from professional athletes. Wilt Chamberlain was once asked how much money he would make if he played during the Michael Jordan era. He replied, "First, the entire league would have to pay my salary." This is exactly the kind of attitude professionals need, and certainly something you can do in your career. If you learn enough meaningful knowledge in your career, you can gain network centrality in your organization. If you continue, it may be possible that it will no longer make sense for you to work for a single company. Instead of working for a single company in what we call the W-2 world, you may very well be better off leveraging your understanding to sign contracts with multiple companies at once. This is actually quite common in the consulting world. Free agency is the ultimate in career empowerment because if you get fired by one company, you will have others as a backup plan. In fact, banks are often more likely to loan to free agents who base their earnings on accumulated knowledge than people working for a single employer in the W-2 world. Becoming a free agent is possible to those who embrace the learning process for themselves and their organizations. Thus, Deutero learning, or learning to learn, is the path toward network centrality, free agency, and beyond. Deutero learning is the path to freedom in your career. This concludes our 3-video series on organizational learning. I hope you find the topic as interesting and useful as I have. Thank you.